Hi, I'm Meredith Blackwell, and this is Don Pfister, and we are doing interviews for the oral history for Mycology project. We're at the University of Florida on the campus at the Hilton Hotel, and we are at the Mycological Society of America annual meeting. And today is the 11th of July, 2022, and we are here to interview one of our society members who is an immigrant to the United States and a nice addition to our country. And Sarah, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thank you so much, Meredith. I'm really glad that I had the opportunity to talk about me a little bit. My name is Sara Branco, or as I say in my native language, Sara Branco. I come from Portugal, and I moved to the US the first time in 2004. And I got here because, Meredith, you helped me. I don't know if you remember that. I was trying to find graduate opportunities, and I was not getting any luck in getting positions in Europe. And somehow I got your email, and I emailed you and asked, how do I get to be part of a graduate program in the US? And you put me in contact with Greg Mueller, who was my PhD advisor. Thank you.
I'm glad. Yeah, one thing I was going to say is that oftentimes if somebody was really interested in a topic and not something I was doing, or somebody who might be better off at a different institution, I would recommend that. Yeah. And especially I like to recommend where there might be several people, mycologists, that could interact with you.
So yeah, I ended up at the Field Museum of Natural History, and I was involved at the University of Chicago. And so it was the best of both worlds of having both a mycological context and a very strong evolutionary biology program. Yeah. So it was great.
And your degree is actually from Chicago?
Yes, yeah. Yes, from the University of Chicago, and I was at the Committee of Evolutionary Biology. Mm-hmm. So officially, I'm an evolutionary biologist, yes, but I'm a mycologist. That's what I am.
Well, mycologists have to be all kinds of things. Mm-hmm. And it's good because you can teach evolutionary biology.
And that's what I do now. Exactly. Exactly.
So tell us a little bit about your background in Portugal and your motivations for doing this.
Yeah, so I always wanted, I knew I always wanted to study biology, like as a kid. But when I was 16, I was in high school, I got to go out with a friend of a friend, who collected fungi, mushrooms for eating. And I didn't know anything about mushrooms, but we went to this natural area close to where I grew up. And that day, all the mushrooms were out. Like, in an afternoon, we probably saw 150 species. And I was shocked. I've been coming here all my life, and I've never seen this. What are these? And I got hooked. And after that, I started buying books on mushroom identification, starting reading about fungal biology. And I decided I'm not only going to go and get a biology degree, but I want to specialize in fungi. And so since then, I did everything I could to get to study mycology. In my country, especially at the time, there were not a lot of people studying fungi. So I ended up doing a lot of self-teaching. And I had to do an honors thesis at the end of my degree, my undergrad degree, that I did alone. I just forced someone to sign papers saying that I was good enough to finish my degree. And I did my first macrofungal survey. And I went to the same area that I first saw all those mushrooms, and I selected habitats, and I wanted to know if the fungal diversity on these different types of forests was different or not, and what kind of fungi are associated with those. And I compiled the first species list for macrofungi for that natural area, and that was eventually published into a little publication that I published alone. It's my first paper. It's not good, but it's in Portuguese, so no one can read it. It's great. So I can lie and say it's an amazing paper.
So you were,
but you're told.
You were collecting and identifying, and you were identifying by yourself.
Yes, so there was a center where I could use a microscope, and there was one lady only that knew a little bit of fungal identification. That was not faculty at my institution, so she was the one that helped me start. And her name was Fatima Estrela, and she was really, really important in kind of helping me with the science of identification, like how to measure spores, how to, what features to look for. But then when it came to writing my thesis and compiling everything together, then I was on my own basically, and for the paper I was on my own too. And so there was a lot of grit and like self-determination. But I did it, and I'm very proud of it.
Yeah, no, I'm sure it's not as bad as you say.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
I just can't imagine having done that at that age by myself.
Yeah, well.
I still can't identify mushrooms.
Yeah, and then after I graduated, I was actually very fortunate to get a job as a mycologist in Portugal, which is unheard of. So I moved to the northeast part of the country, which is very rural, actually. My country is small, 6-hour drive. It's very, very far away. And
Wait. The long way or the short way?
So I went to the northeast, so it's in the border with Spain, and
But I mean 6 hours. Oh, that's where your job was. 6 hours.
I was away from Lisbon, where I was at. Yeah, exactly. I'm sorry I didn't make that clear. And everybody thought I was insane. Like, you're moving to the end of the world. Like, why would you do that? Because it's all relative, right? And so I lived there for 3 years, and I was basically roaming the fields and collecting mushrooms. I also selected specific habitats. That's how I started working on serpentine soils, which I focused on my PhD dissertation.
Now wait, who paid you? What company did you work for? What?
So I was hired by a national park.
Oh.
But the caveat was they paid for my salary, which was great. But there were no books. There was no lab. I had a desk. I'm like, this is not gonna work. So basically I had to convince a local school to let me use their lab. I had to raise money to buy books so I could identify my mushrooms. So it was involved. It was a process.
Is there such a thing as interlibrary loan?
And I'm sure there is now,
but
back in the day. And so what I did was I organized a workshop on mushroom identification, and I had people from all over the country come, and with their registration fees, we pulled money to buy the books that I needed to actually get my work done. Like, you just try to be as resourceful as you can. Right? Yeah.
So when you say the books you needed, I'm always curious about what the books were and the level at which you were trying to approach this.
Yeah, so basically I was working at the community level, so I basically needed keys for most macrofungal genera. And so I remember I bought a monograph of Cortinarius, which I could never put a species name on because they're impossible. Russula, and then Tricholoma, like all the monographs that.
So you were really at the monographic level.
Yes. Yeah. So I had my own like field guides that I bought when I was a teenager, but that was not enough, right?
What language?
So they were all languages. I had books in English, I had books in French, I had books in Italian, I had books in Spanish, like, because there's no translations. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, it was interesting. Yeah. It's interesting. I haven't thought about this part of my life in a long time, so thank you.
And with all that experience, you weren't getting into a grad school?
No, and so I would email people to say, I've been doing this, and I want to do science because I felt like I'm doing this on my own. Like, this is not good enough. I want to learn how to be a scientist. But unfortunately, all the people that I emailed in Europe, they wouldn't get back to me. So I got 0 answers. And so that's when I was out of desperation. I emailed you. It was like, maybe someone will give me an answer. And then with your recommendation, I emailed Greg and I started corresponding with him. And so while I was doing that job, we had IMC in Norway, And I knew Greg was going to go, and I thought, I have to go, because then I can talk to him and see what opportunities I have to actually enroll in grad school.
That was a really good meeting.
It was very expensive. So what I did was I went, I saved all my money. I went and I had a poster with my macrofungal work. I remember vividly. I tracked Greg down and I asked him to come see my poster, and I pointed at it and said, "This is the work that I have no trust in because I don't know what I'm doing. I need help."
That's a great advertisement.
I know. If you're a student, never do this.
No. I'm going to help that poor woman.
And Greg, I remember he smiled and he said, "Yeah, let's try to bring you to the U.S." The problem was funding, as always, right? And so he said, if you can get the money, it would be great to have you. I was like, small detail, like how am I gonna? And then I started looking at the numbers for graduate programs in the U.S. and it's very expensive. I come from a country where education is free. Yeah. And I was like, I don't have thousands and thousands of dollars. Like my family is not wealthy. And so I went back. I was sad and depressed for a few days. It was like, but then I was like, we can do this. Let's just plan and try. And I ended up getting a Fulbright fellowship, and that's how I moved to Chicago. So that was good. I was.
And then they saw how good you were, and they gave you money after that, after the Fulbright ended.
Basically, more complicated than that. So I got the Fulbright, but the University of Chicago sent me the wrong acceptance letter, and they said they would cover my funding for 6 years.
The wrong letter.
You had them.
So the Fulbright said, you don't need money. The university's paying you. So I was very, very fortunate to have 6 years of funding from the university and tuition waived. So that was good. and
Better than a Fulbright.
Exactly. So back at that point, so the Fulbright ended up paying my plane ticket. So I'm still a Fulbright because they gave me a plane ticket. I think it's great, and I embrace it.
Good for the CV.
Exactly. So I came to the U.S. and I was on a visa because I'm not a citizen. The problem with Fulbright, and I don't know if you know this, but there's a caveat that you have to go to your home country for 2 years before you're eligible for a work visa in the U.S. And so when I finished my PhD, I could not officially work or legally work in the U.S. I could try to extend my student visa for a postdoc, but if not, I would have to leave. And I finished my PhD around the economic crisis, so there were no jobs. And so I was then forced. It was the first time that I was forced to leave the U.S. because of visa issues. So I went to Europe for a little bit. I was in Frankfurt, and then I was in Portugal for a little bit, but I was very, very, very fortunate to, at some point, get a postdoc position in California, in Berkeley. And then I applied for the visa again and got one and went to Berkeley. So I was in Berkeley for 4 years after that, which was very, very good. So, yeah, I had the opportunity to shift my work a little bit and expand to population genomics and learn, more. Another scale of biology, which was very good. But then that grant ended, and I was again, not being a citizen, not having a job. I was forced to leave the country again, and I really wanted to stay, but it was hard. But I got a Marie Curie fellowship in Europe, so I went to the University of Paris. I stayed there for 2 years. I started a completely different project in anthersmut fungi, which I never thought I was going to work on. And then it was after that I finally got my first faculty position. So I was able to cross the Atlantic one more time and start my lab at Montana State University, where I was for 3 years. Then I realized that Montana is very small and rural. And when you move from Paris, France to Bozeman, Montana, there's a shock. And so eventually I moved to the University of Colorado in Denver, which, it's a city, it's easier for me. And so personally, it's a better fit.
Now, on your postdoc, were you officially with Tom Bruns?
Yes, so in California, I worked with Tom Bruns and John Taylor.
Yeah, that's why I was wondering which, because I remember when I saw you, you were all combined, and so it's hard to tell who's working with whom.
So Tom Burns and John Taylor were part of this big Dimensions of Biodiversity grant with Kabir Pei and with Ritas Vilgalis at Duke, and Kabir, I think he was still in Minnesota at that point. And so we were all a group, like we were all together, and I've worked closely with both John and Tom, which was wonderful because I got to get both the more ecological perspective and more of the evolutionary perspective. So, for my training as a scientist was very, very...
It was kind of interesting because I know that Tom's daughter finished in ecology, fungal ecology, and did she work on, for her postdoc, did she work on anthers?
Yes, she did. She did a lot of ecology of anthersmuts, and the work that I was doing was very genomic. So I was looking at the architecture of mating genes, mating chromosomes in anthersmuts, and so the focus was different. But having a more ectomycorrhizal background, for me it was a little shift. It was like, all right, I have to think about pathogens now, or like think about different things that are more asexual, that they self, which is something very different from from what I was used to. But it was amazing because then, when you're forced to work with different systems, I think that's when you understand how beautiful and weird fungi are, because then it's like when you're a little group, you get to embrace their weirdness, but then you get out and it's like, oh, there's way more. There's way more out there, right? So I think it was really good for me as, for my progress as a mycologist, and especially as an instructor, because when you're teaching about all this, you have this broader perspective. So it was interesting.
So what do you do in Denver now?
What do I do in Denver? So I've been studying the evolution of metal tolerance, and I focus on the genus Swillus, which is in the bolete family. And basically we're trying to understand the genetic basis of metal tolerance. So which genes are involved and how exactly do different individuals of the same species and how different species are able to cope with environmental stress. And so we have a broad research program where we use a combination of genomics, lab experiments, and field work and greenhouse experiments to test not only how Swillus deals with high metal contamination in the soils, but also because it's mycorrhizal with pine trees, what is the role that metal tolerance in Swillus plays for plant health and plant survival. So I did a lot of work with a team in Belgium that had documented very marked differences across individuals within the same species, that some were very tolerant and some were not tolerant at all to metals. And so we did a lot of genomics work on that system. But what I'm doing now is trying to look at the Swillus that live in Colorado and try to find metal tolerance locally, because working locally is much easier, it's cheaper, but also it has way more impact, because then we can work with the local offices and hopefully have an application for the work that we're doing. I'm a basic biologist, so what makes me get up in the morning is, thinking how fungi evolve. But if my findings can be useful and used in practical applications, then I really want people to do it.
So who pays for all this research? Who pays for?
Yeah, so I got an NSF grant very recently.
I had heard.
Oh, thank you. I was very, very happy. So that has been funding my students and my postdoc and a lot of my research. And I also have a lot of small grants, both internal and external, that can kind of piece everything together. And the other thing that I do is I encourage all my students and all the people in my lab to apply to all awards in all possible pockets of money, and we've been very successful. And so this last semester, my students, I think we got 6 or 7 awards just in the semester. Wow. I know, I'm so proud of them. So we go big and small. It's like everything that is possible, we go in and look for it. Yes.
It takes time.
It does, and effort, and you get rejection, but it's okay. You just go and try again.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to think about how you go about looking at metal tolerance, heavy metal tolerance.
How do you do that?
How, are you examining in the field? And what's the technique?
Yeah, so the first thing we do is we get a mushroom from a place that is contaminated or not. Mm-hmm. We culture it, and then we grow it in a gradient of metals. And we basically just document the growth. That's the first step.
So it's observational.
We start with that. Once we have that and we know which isolates are tolerant and not, then the fun starts. Because then you can sequence all the genomes, compare them, and see, are there genes that are specifically associated or present in the isolates that are tolerant or not? And then you can also look at gene expression, because sometimes the presence of genes is not enough to tell us the function, right? So my master's student is now looking at gene expression across when you grow the same isolate in different concentrations of metal, so you know which genes are being activated. Another thing that we're very excited about is using gene editing techniques. So basically, when we identify the genes that are underlying metal tolerance, if you take the gene out or if you put the gene in, can we make something that is not tolerant, and vice versa? And then the other fun part is that then you can add the pine into the system, and then you can have, if you have a metal tolerant isolate that is associated with the pine, and you water it with metals, is the fungus protecting the pine or not? And our preliminary data show that yes, when there's not enough metals, especially zinc, for example, which is a micronutrient that the pine needs, Swillis is actually going to grab it and help the plant get the zinc. When there's too much zinc, it actually blocks it out. So we want to know exactly how that works. And so another project that we're setting up now is to look at meta-transcriptomics, where we look at gene expression of the plant and the fungus to see who's stressed and who's helping who. And so with that, we hope that putting all these separate studies together, we can have a really clear picture of how this metal tolerant acts. And then if you compare it across different species, Swillis species, you can also study convergent evolution. Like, are different species solving this problem the same way or not? Yeah. So I really want to get an army of people, and I need a lot of money.
A lot of different.
Keep writing proposals.
Exactly. So it's exciting because there's a lot of work to do. Sometimes a little daunting because you want to have all the answers, but it takes time, as you were saying. But I'm just very happy to be developing this new system that is local, where we can explore in different ways, but also give back to the community. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah.
So talking about that kind of thing, then, are you here to stay?
I hope so. I hope so. So it's been a rough patch because my being a Fulbright and having that 2-year home requirement has been not very easy to deal with.
It was all because of a plane ticket.
Exactly, it was all because of a plane ticket. but yeah, I would like to stay. I think that there are no perfect places. Let me start by saying that. I've lived in 4 different countries in 4 different US states. They all have good things and bad things. I feel that it's easier for me, even though it's not easy, but it's easier for me to pursue my ideas here than elsewhere. Mm-hmm. And so I would prefer to stay here and develop my own ideas and my own research projects.
And your university probably will help.
Let's hope so. Yes. Yes.
Good. We want you to stay.
Oh, thank you. I want to stay too. And I have to say that MSA has been instrumental in my whole career. I became a member in 2005 when I first moved to the US. My first meeting was in Hawaii. Since then, it's been amazing. I've been serving in many different capacities, and I have to say that the community, how we listen to each other, how we're committed to make the society better, and how we care about each other is unique. And I'm so proud to be part of this community. And yeah, I want to thank you because you started this before I came. it's amazing, and I'm so proud to bring my students for the first time. And it's their first meeting, scientific meeting, and I'm really, really happy that they get to experience MSA as their first meeting because it's unique. It's a unique environment, and I'm so happy to be here. So thank you.
We're happy you're here.
Glad.
Thank you.
Very glad. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, anything else you want to say?
No, we covered it all. I want to again thank you again, and just maybe encourage everybody that is an MSA member to become involved because it's so much fun to work with MSA, and just keep the community as
I love the auction. All year long, I look for auction items.
Oh, my students are so excited. They're so excited. so yeah, I know it's wonderful to be here.
Good.
Great.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
We enjoyed talking.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Thank you.